Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something that's, well, always relevant, right? Ethics in society and governance. Yeah, we've got some really interesting chapters in the fabric of ethics. And we're going to try to unpack how morality, actually works,
Yeah.
in the messy world of power, politics, and justice. Luckily, we've got our amazing expert speaker with us today. They're a total pro at connecting, well, all the dots,
Mhm.
the historical stuff, the philosophical theories, and what's actually going on in the world.
Yeah. I'm excited to get into it. It's just incredible how these ethical ideas are built into our societies
Mhm.
from way back when to today.
Totally. So, okay, let's start our journey back in time. These chapters take us all the way back to Mesopotamia, Egypt, those ancient places. Can you believe that even thousands of years ago, those civilizations were wrestling with these same dilemmas? I mean, ethics in government and politics, that's ancient history, right?
It really shows you how universal this whole idea of a just and ethical society is. Humans have always been searching for it, Or for example, the Code of Hammurabi in Mesopotamia, almost 1800 BC. One of the earliest written legal codes, they laid out punishments for crimes, like trying to create order, accountability.
It's like they were trying to figure out a blueprint for a moral society
Yeah.
back then. And then you've got the Egyptians with their concept of ma'at, this idea of truth, justice, and cosmic order. It wasn't just for the courts, it was their whole worldview.
Exactly. Mott influenced everything: laws, politics, daily life, even what they believed about, like the afterlife. Imagine, even the pharaohs were held accountable to this idea of cosmic order.
Whoa, talk about accountability. It makes you think, would our leaders today measure up?
Mhm.
Anyway, so aside from those ancient examples, the chapters also get into, those in power today and their ethical responsibilities. Still totally relevant, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Power dynamics are everywhere, right? Governments, leaders, even corporations. And there are always ethical considerations. The book argues that power, just by its nature, comes with these built-in obligations.
So it's not just about what you can do with power, but what you should do.
Right.
What are some of those ethical obligations the chapters talk about?
Well, a big one is the duty to, use power fairly, to act for the good of everyone. The chapters look at how this plays out in government, especially, emphasizing transparency, accountability, no corruption, that kind of thing.
Those are some pretty big ideas.
Yeah.
Do the chapters give any, real life examples?
Hmm.
Or is it all theoretical?
Oh, no, they definitely get into real world examples. There's this case from Diyarbakir, Turkey, really powerful. An 8-year-old girl, she suffered horrible abuse, but justice was delayed because the person who did it had powerful tribal connections.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking. It sounds like a clear example of how power can be used to, get away with things, to stop justice from happening.
Exactly. It shows the tension that can exist between traditional power structures,
Mm-hmm.
like tribal influence, and, well, trying to have impartial justice. And it's not just Turkey, it happens everywhere.
It makes you realize that those in power, wherever they are, need to be held to ethical standards. And it's not just about preventing the bad stuff. It's about actively promoting justice, right?
You're absolutely right. And that leads us to another big theme: justice itself. What does a just society actually look like? The book dives into different philosophical perspectives on this, using the work of some influential thinkers, people like John Rawls, Robert Nozick, and Amartya Sen.
Wow, some serious brain power there.
Yeah.
Can you give us a super quick rundown of their different ideas about justice?
Sure, it's they each offer a different way of looking at this complex idea of justice. You know, John Rawls, he has this famous veil of ignorance thought experiment. He says, a just society is one we design as if we didn't know our own place in it.
Interesting. So you're saying imagine creating a society without knowing if you'll be rich or poor, healthy or sick, powerful, well.
Exactly. Rawls argues that if we think about justice from that perspective, we're more likely to make a system that's fair for everyone, especially the most vulnerable people. Then you have Robert Nozick, who has a very different view. He's all about what he calls a minimal state.
So Nozick is coming from a libertarian perspective, emphasizing individual rights, limited government.
Right. Nozick's priority is protecting individual liberties and property rights. He argues that redistributing wealth, even for social welfare, is violating those rights.
Okay, so a pretty different vision from Rawls. Rawls is more focused on fairness and equality for all. And then we have Amartya Sen adding another layer with his capabilities approach.
Yeah, Sen shifts the focus. It's not just about how resources are distributed, it's about the actual freedoms and opportunities people have to live the lives they want. He asks, what are people actually able to do and be in the society? It's about everyone having the ability to reach their full potential, no matter their background.
Okay, so we have Rawls focusing on fairness, Nozick on individual liberty, and Sen on real-world capabilities. Lots to think about there. How do these different theories of justice connect to, like, ethical governance?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. These theories give us frameworks for judging how ethical a government actually is. They make us ask, is this system fair to all citizens? Does it protect individual rights? Does it help everyone reach their full potential?
So they're not just philosophical ideas. They have real implications for how we critique systems of power.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're not just exploring these ideas like in a vacuum, we're connecting them to the real world, the challenges and dilemmas we all face.
It's like building a toolkit for ethical thinking, one we can use to understand the world around us. We've covered a lot, and I'm sure there's more to explore.
You're right. We've just scratched the surface of these chapters. There's so much more to discuss about the challenges of ethical governance, the dangers of corruption, and the role we each play in shaping a just and moral society.
I'm ready to dive deeper, but let's take a quick break first. When we come back, we'll continue our exploration of ethics in society and governance and get into some of those practical challenges and dilemmas. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were getting into some pretty heavy stuff. Rawls, Nozick, Sen, all those different ideas about what makes a just society.
Yeah, it was like building a whole philosophical framework for understanding justice. But like you said, these aren't just theories. They actually matter for how we think about ethical governance in the real world.
Exactly. And speaking of the real world, the chapters also talk about something, well, unfortunately we see all the time, corruption. It's like this sneaky force that can just undermine, like, even the best intentions, especially when it comes to ethical governance.
You said it. Corruption, it's like it eats away at trust, weakens the rule of law, and in the end just creates more injustice. It's everywhere, a global problem, bribery, extortion, you name it.
It really is like a disease,
Yeah.
spreading through systems of power. And it's not just about, like, a few bad apples, right? The chapters talk about how corruption can become, like, systemic, almost part of the culture in some places.
Exactly. The book points out that corruption thrives where, well, governance is weak. No transparency, no accountability. It's like a perfect breeding ground for unethical behavior.
So it's not enough to just punish individuals. We have to address the whole system that allows corruption to flourish in the first place. That's a huge challenge.
It is. But the chapters do offer some hope. They talk about how crucial ethical leadership is for fighting corruption and for building a culture of integrity.
So it's about leaders setting the tone, right? Establishing clear ethical standards, holding themselves accountable, and everyone else too. Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Absolutely. Ethical leadership isn't just about avoiding corruption. It's about actively promoting transparency, fairness, making sure every decision is accountable, creating a system where doing the right thing is, well, expected and even rewarded.
Makes sense. But let's be real. Ethical leadership, that can feel like a really high bar, especially in a world where there's so much pressure to, cut corners, bend the rules, or just look the other way.
You're right. And that's why the chapters say it's not just about like top-down rules. It's about creating a culture where everyone makes ethical decisions at every level.
So empowering individuals to make those ethical choices, even when it's hard, even when it's not popular.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big part of ethical governance the chapters explore. Individual responsibility. It takes a village, right? We can't just rely on leaders to be ethical. Each of us has a role to play, holding those in power accountable, speaking out against injustice.
Recognizing that we all have a stake in creating a just and ethical society. And that our choices, well, they matter. But honestly, sometimes it feels like our individual choices are like just a drop in the bucket, especially when we're facing these massive systemic issues, like corruption or global inequality.
I hear you. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by how big these problems are. But the chapters remind us that even small acts of ethical courage, they can have a ripple effect.
So it's about choosing to do the right thing, even when it's tough, even when it seems like it won't change much. Can you give us some examples of what that, individual responsibility could look like?
Sure. It could be as simple as refusing to go along with a business deal that feels shady, or speaking up if you see a colleague doing something unethical. You could support businesses that share your values, or advocate for policies that are fair and just.
So it's about being aware of the ethical impact of our choices, big and small. And using our actions, our voices,
Mhm.
to make positive change.
Exactly. And it's also about being willing to have those tough conversations about ethics, even when they're uncomfortable. It's about challenging ourselves and others to live up to higher standards.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's be honest, ethical decision-making isn't always easy, is it? Sometimes it feels like there's no clear right or wrong answer, especially in those like gray areas where different ethical principles clash.
You're absolutely right. Ethical dilemmas are dilemmas for a reason. You often have competing values, conflicting loyalties, unforeseen consequences to think about. It's rarely black and white.
So how do we navigate those gray areas? Do the chapters give us any guidance for approaching these complex ethical decisions?
They do. They introduce some useful frameworks for ethical decision making. One I find really helpful is the 10 steps to ethical decision making. It's
Yeah.
a structured approach that helps you break down those complex dilemmas into manageable steps.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walking through those 10 steps, what's the first one?
The first step is figuring out what the ethical issue actually is. What are the values or principles at play here? Are we talking about honesty, fairness, loyalty, respect, or something else entirely?
So it's about defining the ethical landscape, right?
Yeah.
Before we try to navigate it.
Exactly. Once you've identified the ethical issue, the next step is to think about the consequences of your potential actions. This is where consequentialism comes in.
Consequentialism, I've heard that term before. Remind me what it means again.
It's all about focusing on the outcomes of your actions. What are the possible good and bad consequences for you and for everyone else involved? Will your actions do more good than harm in the long run?
It's like a cost-benefit analysis, but for ethics.
You could say that, but it's not just about numbers. It's about the human impact of your choices. Who might benefit? Who might be harmed? What are the long-term effects?
It sounds pretty thorough. What comes after we've weighed the consequences?
Next, you think about your obligations. Who do you have a duty to in this situation? This is where deontology comes in.
Deontology. Another one of those philosophy terms. Break that down for me.
Deontology is all about moral rules and principles. It's about understanding the duties we have to ourselves and others, based on things like honesty, fairness, loyalty, and respecting autonomy. It's about doing the right thing no matter the consequences.
So if consequentialism is about the outcomes, deontology is about sticking to those moral principles, even if the outcomes are uncertain or maybe even bad.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Sometimes those moral principles can conflict. What if you have to be honest, but telling the truth will hurt someone you care about? What if you have to be loyal to your company, but you see them doing something unethical and you feel like you should report it?
Those are some tough situations. How do we figure those out?
That's where the next step comes in. Check your gut. Listen to your intuition, that inner voice that tells you if something feels right or wrong.
Hold on, you're saying trust my feelings when making ethical decisions? That seems a little, I don't know, unscientific.
You make a good point. Our intuition can be helpful, but we need to check it against our rational analysis. And those ethical principles we talked about earlier, that's why the next step is so important. Get some outside input.
So like a sounding board, get other perspectives to see if your thinking holds up.
Exactly. Talk to people you trust, advisors, mentors, colleagues, people who can offer different viewpoints and help you see the situation more clearly. Sometimes just talking about the dilemma can help you sort through your own thoughts and feelings.
That makes sense. Two heads are better than
Yeah.
one, right? Especially with these tough ethical problems. So what comes after we get that outside input?
Then you think about what if scenarios. Imagine yourself in different roles. What if you were the person affected by your decision? Would you feel differently? What if what you did ended up on the front page of the newspaper? Would you be proud of your choice?
Those are good questions to ask. It helps you see things from other perspectives,
Yeah.
build empathy.
Exactly. And then comes a key step. Identify and actually apply those relevant ethical principles we talked about earlier. Honesty, fairness, justice, respect for autonomy, all of those. It's about figuring out which principles are most important in this particular dilemma.
Like having a toolbox of ethical principles, and we have to pick the right tool for the job.
I love that analogy. And once you've thought about all of this, the ethical issue, the consequences, your obligations, your gut feeling, what other people think, those guiding principles, then it's time to actually make a decision.
So step 8 is when the rubber meets the road. But it's not just about making the decision right. It's about owning it.
You got it. Take responsibility for your decision and whatever happens because of it. Own it, even if it doesn't go as planned.
That's important to remember. Ethical decision-making isn't about taking the easy way out. It's about being accountable for what you do.
Absolutely. And the last two steps are all about reflection. Step 9 is looking back at the outcome of your decision. Did it work the way you thought it would? Did it match up with your values and principles? And step 10 is learning from the whole experience. What did you learn about yourself? About making ethical choices? How can you use those lessons next time?
So it's a constant cycle of, like, ethical growth.
Exactly. We're all learning as we go. Every ethical dilemma we face is a chance to refine our moral compass, to become more thoughtful decision makers, guided by our principles.
That's really insightful. But even with all these tools and frameworks, sometimes we still get stuck in those gray areas, right?
Yeah.
When there's no easy answer and different ethical views pull us in different directions.
You're right. Gray areas are where those neat ethical theories we talk about meet the messiness of real life. And that's where things get really interesting and challenging.
Okay, I'm up for the challenge. Let's dive into those gray areas. What are some common ethical dilemmas we might face, especially in society and governance?
Well, one classic gray area is the tension between being honest and being kind. We're taught to tell the truth, but what if the truth hurts someone or damages a relationship? What if being totally honest feels like you're betraying someone's trust?
It's the classic white lie dilemma, right? Do you spare someone's feelings or stick to the principle of honesty? How do you decide?
It's tough, and there's no easy answer. But one helpful way to think about it is this lie actually causing harm or preventing it? Is there a way to be truthful without causing unnecessary pain? And what are the consequences of either choice down the line?
Those are good questions to ask ourselves. What other ethical gray areas should we be thinking about, especially when it comes to society and how we govern ourselves?
Another common one is the tension between individual rights and the common good. We value individual freedom, but sometimes our choices can hurt others, or society as a whole.
It's like the classic example of smoking. Personal choice, but secondhand smoke can harm people nearby. Or think about the debate over mandatory vaccinations. Individual freedom versus public health.
Exactly. So how do we balance protecting individual rights with keeping the community safe and healthy? It's a question societies have been wrestling with forever, and there's no single right answer.
It's about finding solutions that respect individual autonomy, but also consider the impact our choices have on everyone. What other ethical gray areas might we encounter in society and governance?
Another one that comes up a lot is the tension between loyalty and justice. We all have loyalties to our families, friends, colleagues, our country. But what if our loyalty clashes with what we know is right?
It's like that saying, my country, right or wrong. Blind loyalty can be dangerous, especially if it makes us ignore or even support unethical behavior.
You're right. And this dilemma can show up in so many ways. Think about whistleblowers who see wrongdoing in their organization, but they struggle with whether to speak up. They might feel loyal to their colleagues or their company, but they also know they should expose the truth, even if it means risking their job or reputation.
Classic loyalty versus justice. It's a tough call, and there's no formula for figuring it out. Are there any ethical principles that might help us navigate this kind of situation?
One helpful principle is to think about how serious the wrongdoing is. Is it a small thing or something that could really hurt people? If it's the latter, speeding up, even if it means betraying a loyalty, might be the more ethical choice.
So, weighing the potential harm against your loyalty, asking yourself what's the greater good.
Exactly. And it's also about remembering that loyalty doesn't mean blind obedience. True loyalty sometimes means speaking truth to power, even when it's hard.
That's a powerful reminder. It's about having the courage to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it means challenging those we're loyal to.
You got it. And that's really what ethical decision-making is all about, making those tough calls, even when there's no clear answer, even when you feel torn between different values and loyalties.
It's about navigating those ethical gray areas thoughtfully, with courage, and a commitment to doing what we believe is right, even when it's hard. But I know we've only scratched the surface of these ethical challenges. There's so much more to explore.
You're right. We haven't even touched on the ethical dilemmas with technology, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, the environment. It seems like the gray areas are everywhere.
It's a lot to take in, but I'm ready to dive deeper. But before we get to those other ethical challenges, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue exploring these gray areas and see what other insights the chapters offer. So stay tuned. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? Exploring all these complexities of ethics in society and how we govern ourselves. From ancient codes to the stuff we're dealing with today, we've covered a lot.
Yeah, it really is fascinating to see how ethical thought has evolved over time and how those core principles still influence us, But like we were talking about before the break, things keep changing, right?
Yeah.
Especially with technology advancing so fast and the world becoming more and more interconnected.
You're so right. We're facing all these new ethical challenges, stuff our ancestors couldn't have even dreamed of, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, the impact of globalization. It's making us rethink, like, what morality even means.
Totally. Like take AI, for example. It's changing everything, right?
Yeah.
How we work, how we talk to each other, how we make decisions, even how we experience the world. But it comes with all these ethical questions we're just starting to wrap our heads around.
AI is everywhere these days, it seems. Self-driving cars, personalized medicine, those algorithms that choose what news we see, even influencing elections. It's exciting, but kind of scary too, you know? What are some of the specific ethical concerns about AI that the chapters bring up?
One of the biggest ones is bias. AI systems are trained on huge data sets. And a lot of times, those data sets reflect existing biases in society. So if we're not careful, those biases get baked into the algorithms. And that can lead to discrimination. Like, imagine an AI hiring tool that unintentionally favors certain groups over others. It would just perpetuate the inequality that's already there.
Wow, so it's like those historical biases we talked about are finding new ways to stick around, even in our technology. It's almost like the algorithms are inheriting our prejudices.
Exactly. We need to be super aware of this potential for bias. And we have to create ways to make sure AI is developed ethically and responsibly. The chapters talk about the importance of transparency and accountability in AI. We need to know how these systems are making decisions and hold the people who create them responsible for dealing with any biases that pop up.
So it's not just about making AI systems that are powerful, but also ethical.
Right.
It seems like we need a whole new set of ethical rules for the digital age,
Yeah.
like a digital ethics code to make sure this technology is used for good, not for harm.
Absolutely. And luckily, there's a growing movement for ethical AI. Researchers, policymakers, people in the industry are all working together, trying to come up with guidelines and principles for responsible AI innovation.
That's good to hear. It sounds like people are taking these ethical challenges seriously and actually trying to find solutions that make AI benefit everyone. But what about those other technologies you mentioned, like genetic engineering? That seems like a whole other level of like ethical complexity.
You're telling me gene editing technologies like CRISPR are changing everything, medicine, agriculture, even how we understand human evolution. But it also raises these huge ethical questions about how much humans should intervene and what might happen if we change the very building blocks of life.
It does feel kind of like science fiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is it okay to edit genes to prevent diseases? What about enhancing human abilities? Are we playing God? Where do we draw the line?
Those are the big questions. Bioethicists are wrestling with these dilemmas right now, and there's no easy answer. The chapters look at different ethical viewpoints on genetic engineering, emphasizing that we need to think very carefully and consider the long-term consequences, not just for individuals, but for future generations.
It really is mind-blowing to think about changing the human genome. It's like we're holding the future of our species in our hands. We got to be cautious and like super responsible. But all of this isn't happening in a vacuum, is it? Technology is advancing within a global context that's getting more and more complex and interconnected.
You're absolutely right. Globalization has done a lot of good, connecting people and cultures like never before, boosting economies and driving innovation. But it's also created new ethical challenges. We're dealing with global problems that need everyone to work together to share responsibility.
It's like we're all part of this web of humanity now.
Hmm.
Everything we do has ripple effects across the globe. What are some of the specific ethical challenges of globalization that these chapters talk about?
One of the big ones is global inequality. Globalization has helped a lot of people escape poverty, but it's also led to a bigger gap between the rich and the poor, both within countries and between them. This raises ethical questions about fairness, justice, and how resources are distributed worldwide.
It's strange, right? We're living in a world with so much abundance, but also so much scarcity. We have the resources and technology to fix a lot of the world's problems. But those resources are often controlled by a small group, while billions of people are struggling to survive.
Exactly. And this inequality has huge ethical implications. The chapters explore this idea of global justice, making us think about what we owe to those living in poverty, and how our choices, even as individuals, might be contributing to or alleviating global suffering.
It makes you realize that our ethical responsibilities go beyond our own communities and countries. We're all citizens of the world, and we share a responsibility to make a fairer and more just world for everyone. But along with global inequality, there's another huge ethical challenge linked to globalization: climate change.
Absolutely. Climate change might be the biggest ethical challenge we face today. It threatens everyone's well-being now and in the future, and the health of the planet itself. It raises fundamental questions about our responsibility to future generations, the value of all life on Earth, and how much we can consume and take from the planet.
It can feel so overwhelming. What can we even do as individuals in the face of these enormous global problems? Can we really make a difference?
It's easy to feel helpless, but the chapters remind us that every choice, every action matters, even if it seems small. We can choose to consume ethically, reduce our impact on the environment, support businesses and organizations that align with our values, and advocate for policies that promote sustainability and global justice. It's about recognizing that we're not just isolated individuals, we're part of a bigger system, and our choices have a ripple effect on the world around us.
It's about understanding our place in the world, right?
Yeah.
And making choices that reflect what we believe in, our commitment to making the world better for everyone. But let's be real, these global challenges can be pretty daunting. It's easy to get discouraged, to feel like our individual efforts don't matter much.
That's true. It's important to remember that ethical progress takes time. It's about those small steps, those gradual changes, and working together to build a more just and sustainable world. And sometimes it's about finding hope amidst all the challenges, recognizing that even those small acts of kindness, compassion, and ethical courage can make a real difference.
That's a really important reminder. We need that hope to keep us going, to keep working towards a better world, even when it seems impossible. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into ethics, what are some key things you hope our listeners will remember? What's the main message you want to leave them with?
Well, if there's one thing I hope sticks with you, it's this. Ethics matter. They matter in our personal lives, in our communities, in our workplaces, and on a global scale. Every choice we make has ethical implications, and all those choices, together, they shape the world we live in.
So, it's not just about theories or philosophical arguments. It's about how we actually live our lives, how we treat each other, how we face the challenges in the world around us.
Exactly. It's about developing our moral compass,
Right.
thinking carefully about our choices, and trying our best to make decisions that align with our values and principles. It's about recognizing how interconnected we all are, and using our voices and actions to create a more just, equitable, and sustainable world for everyone.
That's a great message to end on. Thanks so much for taking us on this incredible journey into the world of ethics. It's been thought-provoking, challenging, and in the end, really inspiring.
It's been my pleasure diving deep with you. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and encouraged you to keep thinking about these important ethical questions.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep those minds curious, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.